Tuesday, March 26, 2025 Policy Committee meeting. I'll call to order. Move to 1.02, approval of Policy Committee draft meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I will go ahead, Nancy. I'm trying to.
Motion to approve.
And a second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? And that's unanimous. Don't think we have any public comment, so we can go ahead and jump to 1.04, Policy 436.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. So Policy 436, currently titled School-Sponsored Publications and Media / Student Journalists, was adopted in 1986 and last revised in 2016. So even though it is not the oldest policy on our books, it is still 10 years since our last revision. It was first presented for discussion on October 23rd, 2024. At the time, the discussion focused on encouraging the student voice, retaining principal authority and discretion to make decisions, ensuring compliance with the law, providing clarity in our definitions, the use of AI, and development of a companion regulation. We are presenting a revised version of the policy with the following recommendations. We are going to adjust the title we're proposing to adjust the title simply to school-sponsored media. Staff thinks that this is a more succinct title while at the same time being broader in scope, because now journalism means a whole new thing in a digital world. We establish a three-part policy purpose to respect and recognize constitutional rights of students, to encourage journalism, and also to codify and establish the principal's authority. Within the definitions, we provide updates to the existing definitions. Libel and obscenity remain the same. Those are hard things to define, frankly, as Justice Potter put it. I'll know it when I see it. But that's about that's about as fine a definition as you can get in some cases. We do redefine publication away from being both a noun and a verb, and make it just the verb. What is then being published is school-sponsored media, which is more broad and all-inclusive than just publication, and then it, in and of itself, has its own definition that we've enhanced to create what is a school-sponsored media. And the definition is derived out of the education code, so it's not something that we came up with whole cloth. The policy statement itself, and again, I'm not going through every minor little piece that we're going to. The policy statement itself does not have any substantive changes. The staff reviewed it and felt that it was a sufficient articulation of what the board's interests are, but of course, if that is something you all would like us to do differently, we can certainly discuss that. Within the implementation section, paragraph 1 is largely unchanged with respect to the school-sponsored media. There's some wordsmithing just to clean it up a little bit. We re-emphasize the student code of conduct and its place in this world, which is something that the board or the policy committee mentioned during the prior meeting. Much of what you'll see in here is also derived out of the education code. So again, there's not a lot of flexibility with the content of this section. We have reframed section 2 as about the student media advisors and made it clear that all school-sponsored media must have a student media advisor. Doesn't matter the medium, but they have to have someone on the staff who is supporting them. We again re-emphasize the student code of conduct here to make sure that the student media advisor knows that this is something that is important. And we incorporate into this section the statement that there won't be retaliation against the student media advisor for attempting to protect the student's constitutional rights. And again, this derives from statute. This is not something, although we fully support it, it is set for us. So we are proposing to remove paragraph 3 in its entirety. And paragraph 3 speaks to activities not permitted on school premises should not be condoned by school publications. The intention of this paragraph is really to indicate that students should not be publishing about things that would be prohibited on school grounds. And here is where you start to feel the tension between restricting expression and the First Amendment right to expression. And the lines here are drawn by the Supreme Court in Tinker, which I know all of you are familiar with, and Hazelwood against Kohlmeyer, which is another student journalism case that came out of the Supreme Court. I want to illustrate the thinking of staff in removing this by referring to a different case, though. And I'm going to take a minute to walk through it, even though you may be familiar with it. And that's the Morse against Frederick case, and that does not involve us. It happens to be the principal of that school had the last name Frederick. Or the student, I'm sorry, the student in the school had the last name Frederick. This is the Bong Hits for Jesus case, if that helps place it in context. So the student, Joseph Frederick, he was a senior at an Alaska high school, and he was participating in a school-sponsored activity. Namely, the school was lined up watching the Olympic torch relay, and he had a big banner that said, "Bong Hits for Jesus." And the school suspended him for it, saying that it violated school policy against promoting drug use. He sued. He initially won, but he ultimately lost in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court held that the First Amendment does not prevent restriction on student expression reasonably viewed as promoting illegal drugs. Great. Why would we want to take out a paragraph that would align with that statement? Well, because now we live in a world where marijuana is legal in this state. And if a student wanted to publish an article about the legalization of marijuana, the question is, well, would that be considered promoting it on school grounds, or would that be an expression of their First Amendment right? So as staff, we didn't discuss the case, but we discussed the concept, and we were really concerned about infringing upon the First Amendment rights of the students to express themselves. We felt that the authority vested in the principal to ultimately make the decision, which is still supported by the Supreme Court, and the placement of a student media advisor there to help guide the students provided enough guideline and framework, along with the student code of conduct, that this statement became ultimately unnecessary in the policy, because we just were concerned about whether it would get pushed too far and infringe upon the First Amendment rights of the students. So, certainly, if the panel feels like it's a statement that needs to be in there, we can bring it back, we can massage it and change it, but the recommendation is to remove that paragraph. And then paragraph 4, which is about guidelines for yearbook and newspaper, is replaced with paragraph 5, what is numbered as paragraph 5, which is just a general statement regarding regulations. And again, that's because this is broader than just a yearbook and newspaper now. This is online publications, this is blog, this goes.
Morning announcements have become a news show at some school. So.
Yes. So we wanted to propose that we make this a broader statement. And those are the changes that we're proposing. Mr. Murphy's here to help answer any questions that you might have. And our recommendation is that we advance this to the board for a first reading.
I have a question. So I'm not opposed to eliminating those statements, as you indicate, striking them from the policy. But in regards to the promotion of, drugs, alcohol, and so forth, are you looking at the content? When you determine, what's an infringement on their rights, you're looking at the tone, the note, the intention of the article, or are you looking at just the fact that they have the freedom to express their opinion, their position, their perspective?
So I think that's really a principle-driven question. And it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. I think the principal will be looking at the tone. I mean, if the tone of the article is to say we should legalize marijuana on campus or on a school site, that will directly violate the board's policy against that. And I think the principal would have to make that decision to say this is violative of that right. If it is a different kind of a piece where it's just expanding upon, well, this is the changes in the law, and this is what the law now says, more factual, less seeking to make a change, that to me, and Scott, please weigh in, I think a principal would likely allow that.
Yeah, that's also in policy purpose number 1. protecting the rights of others and the normal functioning of the school environment. The principal's ultimate job is the normal functioning of the school environment, and there is kind of a judgment call there, based on tone, based on anticipated disruption, based on the code of conduct, if there's a violation there that oversteps something in the code of conduct. So it ultimately would come down to a judgment that a principal needs to make, which is why in the purpose we also really clearly establish the authority of the principal to make those calls.
I have a whole big school law book that's 20 years old, but anybody that's taken school law or deals with it all the time knows that a lot of times case law started from a situation where one or the other party, school or, public, were sort of unreasonable. And then when the other side said, I don't like your decision, and it went on, and then it was determined it wasn't reasonable. So I think, or that's why that's such a, you can protest, but they can stop it from being too disruptive. So doesn't mean that principals aren't going to make decisions that aren't going to be popular, or not be taken further, but the only way for that to unfold is for it to unfold.
The other thing, Ms. Allen, too, is the development of a regulation. This is another one of those cases where we don't have a regulation to look at side by side. But some of those criteria, the guardrails that principals will need, guidelines for principals, would be there in a regulation. There's also some things that we didn't call out specifically, like AI.
Just gonna ask that too.
We talked about academic honesty in a general sense for the policy, but more specific references to some of the implications with digital media, AI, et cetera, would be addressed in a regulation.
Okay, all right, good, because that was a follow-up question too about regulation. What's the outline there for that? What's included?
Yeah, well, part of an additional rationale for why AI is not referenced is because it is so in flux right now. There are so many pieces of legislation and the state trying to put together guidance on AI. It felt like AI use in an academic setting will be addressed in a different way. AI use in the journalism setting would fall under the journalistic ethics that students are going to be taught in their class. And I mean, I think as staff, we felt that it would be hard to make a statement about AI on this specific policy without that broader AI view in the education setting already having been set, which it hasn't been.
It is also addressed in the Code of Conduct. So the reference to academic honesty is outlined in the Code of Conduct. There's a specific section there that addresses AI.
Okay. So when we talk about school-sponsored media or publications, are they at the site level that we're speaking to in this? So there isn't a student publication that goes broadly,
Not district-wide.
not district.
Like not a district
Not
produced.
district-wide that we would say is FCPS sponsored
Like
as
student,
opposed to a school.
Okay.
Now, in the world of digital,
Everything is.
I think some of our.
Get out there.
Yeah, they can
Yeah,
pass it
and-
out. Yeah, but it's not sponsored by FCPS.
Okay.
Many of the student newspapers that are online will now have a social media feed that they're posting their articles, but those would be sponsored by a media advisor that we refer to here, who would also be monitoring how those things are posted. And then, obviously, students from other schools would maybe start to follow that.
When we talk about the review by the principal and looking at D1C, just a language question there. It says the school principal or designee in consultation with the teacher. Should we change that to in consultation with the student media advisor? D1C, bottom of page 2. It's just where we refer to them as teacher, since in every other area in the publication, we call it the student media advisor.
Catch.
And I think that's the paragraph right there that
Yeah, exactly.
provides the guardrails around you know, it's kind of like the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, you know, that's what they're there for. Because I appreciate removal of that particular one statement that's so firm and it's, you know, that our role is too to teach them what the freedom of the press means and what their guardrails are. So I think it's appropriate to fit under this particular paragraph C, but remove where we have some strict. And like I said, I think in every policy we're looking at now is we're constantly referring back to the student code of conduct. And I think that's appropriate.
Other questions or concerns? So then the recommendation again is to advance it to the board. We'll make that one edit on D3C to change teacher to student media advisor. Just need a vote.
Move that we send it to the board.
Okay.
Second?
All right. All in favor? All right. That's unanimous.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to 1.05, policy 401, the school calendar.
So Eric sends his regrets.
And I'm gonna, if I can, take a moment, since we moved pretty quickly at 9 and we had someone stop in. Were you interested in giving any comment?
No.
Okay, just wanted to give you that opportunity because we started really quickly and got right past public comment. So thank you for being here. Okay, so now let's jump right back into 1.05.
Sure. So Dr. Lewis Phillips sends his regrets. He was unable to join us today, but he and I had several relatively extensive meetings to review this draft, and so I'm prepared to present fully on his behalf. So the school calendar policy was adopted in 2001. It was last revised in 2018. So again, not our oldest, but still, you know, good 6-7 years since it was last updated. It was first presented for discussion before this panel on January 21st. At the time, the discussion focused on professional days, ensuring compliance with COMAR and state law, establishing a policy purpose to discuss the parameters, the use of the calendar committee, the commitment to teacher professional learning days and emergency closures. There was a request to incorporate a statement on religious holidays. There was discussion regarding leave excused absences as a mechanism to support celebrating those holidays instead of having them on the calendar. And then there was some requests for cross-reference to regulations and policies for absences. So what is presented for you are the edits that result. The policy purpose is tweaked. It's not really substantively all that different. It is really just a slight wordsmithing. Staff do not believe that there are any terms that require definition for this policy. The plain ordinary meaning of most terms in this particular case seem appropriate. The policy statement addresses consistent instructional time, the importance of professional growth and student achievement. It is derived from Policy 101 and Regulation 40101, which are supportive. 40101 is the supporting regulation. 101 is the board's policy on the organization of the board, which includes the board advisory committees, one of which being the calendar committee. Within the implementation, paragraph A establishes the schedule for adopting calendars. In the past, it seemed like, and I'm going back, a few years, the calendar would come up 2 years at a time, and then not a year, and then 2 years at a time, and then not a year. And then it's shifted to being addressed every year for 2 years down the road. So that's what we've codified here, is that system seems to work for us, where we're looking at it 2 years ahead. So in paragraph 1, we're codifying that with an example, because we felt in this case, we don't often put examples in the policies, but we thought it would be helpful to illustrate the sequence and schedule. And then just a regular statement that the calendar will comply with law and with the parameters established by the board. Paragraph 2 is those parameters. So here's where I ask for the board to provide some feedback, or for the panel to provide some feedback. These are all of the parameters that have been articulated in past years. Are you sure you want to bind yourself to these parameters? Or would you rather a statement that is more plain that says the board will establish parameters for the calendar committee by, and we can pick a date that doesn't tie you into always having these particular parameters.
I actually had a question around that. I was gonna ask a question around that, is that if we were gonna publish this, what was the point of having on our board agenda a calendar parameters meeting when the policy was articulating those parameters? Which there has been some flexibility over the years based upon advocacy from the community. And personally, I think I'd just leave it vague.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say subject to change.
Yes, yes.
And
You
it just,
know.
it says include, it doesn't say only to consider. I mean, so include means you will consider at least these 8 parameters, but
Right.
there could be others that you add.
Maybe we make a statement around that.
Yeah.
like,
You
you
could
know,
say
just
which may
qualify.
include,
Yes.
and
Well,
Or do you want to just leave it as simple as
simple.
the calendar, the board will provide the calendar committee with parameters by the second meeting of September, and we can go back and look at when that meeting has happened consistently and pick a time frame that aligns with that. And then, you know, each year, we're gonna know what those parameters were, because we'll have the prior years.
That's right.
And we'll be able to see if there are changes. My recommendation would be to take it out and not bind your hands and say, we have to consider the days of the
Yeah.
week for 2-hour early dismissal and teacher work days.
Yeah, I agree, because, you know, the strategically using of built-in inclement weather days was a question that was presented at the calendar committee, and there was really no notes or in the meeting minutes to define exactly what that meant, you know.
Yeah, I'm not
to
even sure
give
what that
them-
means.
To give them instructions. I think it was talking about the use of those days for instruction. That's what it was. That's my assumption based on conversations we've had, but it was not, it
could
wasn't
be
documented. so.
Getting them in earlier, like we'll use, I don't know, President's Day or something, if you had a bunch of days, strategically using, it's also awkwardly built in, rather than tacking them on to the end of the year when they're of no use to anybody, but whatever, if we're getting rid of it, it doesn't matter. I was gonna say you could take out B, including, because it already says which include, but if we're taking the whole thing, doesn't matter.
yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
I
Let's just
think-
leave it broad and vague,
Although, just to sort of think about it, there's some sort of permanency to these things. I mean, I would imagine there's very little that will change some of these things being included. That's sort of the other argument, right? Like, you're always gonna wanna have probably options for fair day. You're probably
Maximize
always gonna
5-day
wanna
weeks.
maximize
Yeah.
So there's sort of the counter perspective might be, like, what are the things you can really predict are probably never going to change? But there are some things in here I could certainly think that, you could change the language to. But I actually was thinking, these aren't really board parameters. I would say these are scheduling best practices. So I might actually offer not to remove them, but to change the description of them, because they don't bind you to anything. They are a description of the board's philosophy about best practices. So just to offer sort of a counter perspective.
I can go with the ones that you said, the maximizing number of 5-day weeks, and because we love our fair day, we love our farm community.
Right. For scheduling priorities,
I
it's
was
like,
gonna say, we could just,
call it that. I mean,
yeah, language that the board will consider the following scheduling best practices when defining parameters.
Right, and I'm not that it's any sort of equivalency, but.
Held to it.
Right, you're not held to it. So when I was any administrator who's ever built a master schedule, you always had these sort of constructs that you tried to follow. I know when I was a principal, I used to try to have literacy in the morning, because that's when you've really got the attention of your youngest learners. Or I might try to maximize the opportunity to schedule interventions. They're sort of best practices, but I wasn't bound to it, meaning if I couldn't make it work or it wasn't a requirement. And so it's just perhaps a way of honoring what's there, but not restricting the board's desire to go in a different direction.
I would advocate that we actually eliminate G and H if we're gonna talk about, the best practices.
yeah, those don't really,
Yeah.
They're not specific anyway, so.
Yeah, I mean, they're just
Yeah.
they're just
Yeah.
scheduling best practices.
Yeah.
You're not required to do it.
Yeah, so just,
But I
And you
do,
swayed us back the other way. No, I mean, I think it's fine, and I was, in my mind was, well, there's always a presentation, but what would happen if some crazy thing, you know, where, and
if it's
it's
best
here for the public.
And if these are the best practices, these are the philosophical approaches the board will always try to take, and then it allows the board to have maybe a more rich discussion about limited parameters. Like, there might be a context in a given year that becomes really a key priority. So yeah, continue to exercise these, but you're not required to do them. Here's the parameter. Here's the one thing you must do. That's when I think of a parameter, that's what I think of.
So, I hear G and H come out of the list.
yeah.
Are there any of the other 6 that you feel should come out? And again, this is not, the way it will be reframed, it won't be binding, and these will be suggestions of the
I would-
view of the board, but.
Yeah, I'd say A, only because that may not be true year after year. You know, there has been a lot of discussion in the calendar committee around starting after Labor Day, not starting. You know, personally, I think that we may never go back to that. But again, the state law might change, so depending on who's in the administration, and so maybe not putting that as, I don't know, just my thought there.
It's funny because even though I've been a proponent of what we've been doing, I did look at that one and maybe it could just either be left out or beginning the school year according to.
That's a good example of a parameter, actually, because
yeah, that can be set each year based on, are we trying
Either
to,
way.
are we trying to coincide with FCC? Are we trying to maximize the days for dual enrollment and AP? I mean, so yeah, I would support removing that one.
So A, G, and H are out.
Yep.
B, C, D, E, F.
Perfect.
With a different
And they
verbiage
also,
in the front.
those, with the exception of Fair Day, they also align with the unions.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm not as,
One of the strategic goals of the system, I mean, to have as many
Right,
5-day work
Right.
weeks and 5-day class
Right,
weeks as we
the
can, that's just,
consistency for
sure, and I think the
instructional
concerns of
purposes.
parents and families,
Right, yes.
Yeah.
have, when they have lots of disruptions.
I like the idea of leaving those in general, just because I think a lot of times, I mean, no one's ever happy with the calendar.
that
It's
is-
always 50-50, and there's always a challenge,
Is
and
that
I think
true?
it's
Maybe we
important to
should make a
support
statement
the
there.
calendar committee, so to give them a little framework to say, well, we're really trying to focus on what the policy is set in place for us, and here's what the board has charged us with this year. So I think it's good to keep some more specifics in, and it's easy to refer back to say, hey guys, check this out. Even answering questions as an administrator or, a PTSA person or, wherever those questions come, it's kind of easy to pull this back up and say, well, this is what they look at, and this is the best we got, because Labor Day was whenever it was this year, or Fair Day was when, I think it's good to keep a framework that's easily accessible.
One other thing that I noticed was missing, and I don't know if it's, again, a board interest from a policy perspective, is the board's been really deliberate about seeking community input prior to taking action. I don't know if there's any interest, or if it's appropriate, to signal in the policy that there would be an expectation that the board solicit community input in the development of the calendar.
We
It's
do
in
have
the
that.
process, that's a process, right? Like.
Yeah, but you don't have do we have a reg for this?
There is a corresponding reg, but we do, but we do in other policies make a specific statement. Think of the redistricting. We make a specific statement about including.
Yeah.
and it's in our policy statement.
The philosophy.
I think the difference though between the redistricting and here, we have a calendar committee that is composed of the community.
Is that at the board's direction? Should we signal the board?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
the calendar committee is one of the board advisory committees that's created by board
Should signal
policy.
that you-
So I think that its existence alone.
Its charter exists to
You
include.
could signal in the policy that the board had directed for the establishment of a calendar committee.
Yeah.
Would be maybe a-
And we can include that. It's already exists in
Oh, it's
policy
in
101.
another- oh, it's in 101,
policy
okay.
101, so.
As a standing
Maybe
committee.
then just reference 101 at the end? to the extent it's appropriate. If it's not, it's already referenced.
It's referenced, so there you go.
I withdraw my,
There you go.
So turning to paragraph 3,
So I want to go back to maybe, and maybe this wasn't completely your intention, but to speak to the process of community involvement in the policy.
that would be a regulatory.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if that's outlined somewhere else, then we're good.
As we say in the statement, the board believes it is important to consider feedback from both the Frederick County community and FCPS staff.
All right, okay.
All right,
Okay.
next 3.
so paragraph 3, we're proposing the removal of 3A, which is that the length of the work year for teachers will be negotiated with the Teachers Association. This is not to say that we are not going to continue to negotiate with our Teachers Association. This is to say that this doesn't belong in the calendar policy because it's not a function of the calendar. In B, we're incorporating language that comes out of both statute and COMAR to reference the number of days and hours that students are expected to attend. We are proposing to strike that there will be no reduction in income source or funding sources because, again, that's outside the control of the board. The board doesn't get to say, we're not going to get funded because of that. That's a decision that's going to be made by either the state or local government. So we felt that keeping that statement in there really had little place. There were no substantive change to paragraph 4. Paragraph 5, we incorporate the statement about academic calendar and religious observance holidays, the incorporation of religious observance holidays. This is to align with with COMAR. You'll also see related to this, in the related information section, we've included links to 3 state board decisions that speak to calendar appeals. And that is the source of much of the discussion that we have all had on whether a religious holiday should be observed as part of the school calendar.
There's a current bill, Dean and I were just on MABE legislative meeting, virtual on Monday, and there's what is currently a local bill for Howard and Montgomery. But Jen Mallow, the chair of the legislative committee from Howard County, asked MABE's support, which I believe was given, because I can never vote on their little online poll, so I have to put it in chat, but a lot of us have that problem. So I think it passed to give all support, and what it would have mandated all sorts of extra holidays. And one of the things, and so right now they already try to work with those, but one of the EADs, because of the way it's set, it just changed dates. And they already had their calendar set, so with little time to modify the calendar, things like that would require them to have done it, which it was not going to work out, and it would have caused major problems. So while they're already trying to work with that, they didn't want it mandated. And the feeling is if they do it for Howard and Montgomery, it will soon, be a statewide thing. So just to look at that.
House Bill 1169,
Thank you.
to mandate that they close for the first day of Diwali, both of the Eids, the Lunar New Year,
Yes.
Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. The hearing, it's in the Senate, and the next hearing is on April 1st, should anybody be interested. The issue with this bill, just since you brought it up, is the fiscal note, because it's going to cost money when you have to sort of account for that, so.
Well, and I think what Howard was saying is, it wouldn't be this year, but it just they were encountering the problem this year, that was it May 30th? I can't remember the dates. And they had something already set for one date, and now that the holiday, and they had the holiday on there, and now it was shifting to the date that they couldn't even accommodate it. So it wasn't even a matter of fiscal they couldn't even do it, and is how I took it. So anyway.
Yeah, it's in committee.
So MABE will be, I believe, taking a stance against that.
So the other changes in this paragraph are to reference Juneteenth as a holiday that the board authorizes the observance. and to articulate what is codified in Education Code 7-103, that if the observance of a holiday falls on a different day, so this is why we celebrate the 4th of July on the 3rd of July, if it happens to fall on the 4th falls on a Saturday, we celebrate it on the Friday, and that the board has the ability to choose that. The appropriate exercises in paragraph 6, again, these updates are to align with the education code. The devote a part of at least one day as opposed to conduct comes out of the code. The addition of Black History Month and the specific references to Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, etc. Again, that comes out of the code. Very, not much editorial license there. 7, 8, 9, no changes. 10, we add that, so 10 is about notification of delayed openings and cancellations. We've added in the body early dismissals as well. Should be included, that there's an expectation that early dismissals will be distributed via some kind of a notification as well. If we need to, we may need to update the header for that paragraph from notifications of delayed openings or cancellations to include early dismissals. So I might suggest that as a recommended additional edit. But otherwise,
Repeat what you just said.
the header where it says
thank
notification of
you.
delayed openings or cancellation of schools. Since we're adding to the body early dismissals, we should probably add that to the header so it's clear.
Thank you.
And those are really the edits that staff are proposing.
Just a general question. Is it is in Comar anywhere that, in looking at 5D, if, and there's very few that this happens, they're typically already designated Mondays, a lot of them, but if we do have a holiday that falls on a Saturday or Sunday, are we mandated to have Friday or Monday off?
Yes. And it's not coming out of Comar, it's coming out of,
That's like,
Although it's interesting that you bring this up, because one thing about the House bill that struck me in reading it was that when it lists all the holidays, like all the Eids and Diwali, it even has Juneteenth on there. It says first day if it begins on a weekday. So they actually, and they say specifically in the bill also, closed to student attendance, which sort of opens the door to turning it into a professional day or some other work day, which is where the fiscal note.
Day following the holiday?
no, for, like, because the
So
Eids
if, like-
actually last day.
I'm talking about Juneteenth or
Oh, yeah,
or
no,
4th of
right.
July.
So it's interesting, because I think the question is the difference between
Preceding or following?
federal and local, because, for example, if Rosh Hashanah well, that's not a good example, because that's a multi-day holiday, but if a holiday fell on a Saturday, the school system would not have to close Friday or Monday. That's like a bad
I guess
example.
that's the question I was asking is
Yeah.
particularly 4th of July and Juneteenth. Could fall on a Saturday or a Sunday.
the statutes.
Mandated by statute.
Yes, the statute specifically says, if the federal and state observances of a holiday are on a different day, the Board of Education of each county shall determine which day shall be the date of observance for the public schools within the county. What that section means is, if July 4th falls, because July 4th is a federal holiday, we're all, required and entitled to observe it. If that falls on a Saturday, the board must choose another day to observe it. Now,
The word there is shall.
exactly. And it doesn't say that it necessarily has to be the day before July 3rd. It could be you choose to do it on July 6th for whatever reason and shift it to the Monday. Realistically, are you ever going to do that? No. Everyone's going to expect to get the Friday off because that's been the traditional.
Don't they usually do
If it's a Sunday.
It's Sunday.
If it's a Sunday, you get the
But if it was a Saturday,
That's
you
what
would.
it's
Saturday, you
Monday,
get.
See how I
Saturday,
pay
it's Friday,
attention?
Sunday, Monday.
Right, and
I just wondered if it was,
but if it fell on a Wednesday, you could theoretically choose to give it on a Thursday instead of a Tuesday.
Yeah, you're right.
But it is required by statute.
I guess that would go back to an effort to keep your days contiguous. You might decide to celebrate it on a Friday in order to have 4 straight days of school. I mean. Correct. Okay.
Is it true, if I'm reading this right, does it say that if the holiday's a Saturday, you're supposed to close the day preceding, and if it's a Sunday, you close the day following?
On the federal schedule, that's how they.
That's how it is,
That's how they
right?
observe
Okay.
it, yeah.
I don't think that's specifically articulated in statute.
Kind of expected.
I may be looking at federal.
D, it says the board shall, well, that's after,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I just was curious if that was legally mandated. Okay.
So if there are no other questions, then the recommendation again is to advance this to the board with the indicated edits.
Motion to move it to the board.
Second?
All in favor? That's unanimous. Alrighty, let's move on to 1.06, policy 410, and policy 111
Yes.
together here.
So these go hand in hand. Originally, when we had discussed 410, it was adopted in 2001, revised in 2017, and presented for discussion in November. At the time, the discussion focused on merging 410 and policy 111, which is school and workplace safety, into a single policy, decommissioning 410 in the process. We came back in February, and we did not have a written update at the time because there had been some recent guidance from MSDE that we wanted to incorporate into the draft, and we needed a little additional time in order to achieve that. In working through that process, staff drew the conclusion that 111 and 410 really were not quite as compatible as we first thought. 111 seems to focus more about threat assessment and less about drilling for safety. And Mr. Blundell can maybe speak a little bit more to the distinction, but we came to the conclusion that it wasn't quite the match we thought it was. So we made the decision, we'll make the edits to 410 directly, we'll leave 111 alone. A copy of 111 was provided as part of the agenda item, so you can see what it currently says. But we're not going to actually have any more discussion about 111 unless the panel wants us to reconsider and go back to merging them. Mr. Blundell, do you want to add anything there?
I think the impact that 111 has on 410 is that when there are threats involving our students, staff, or our schools, we might utilize a protocol to make sure everyone's safe at the initial time. But the threat assessment process talks about receiving the threat, triaging it, and providing appropriate resources to support the student or staff involved, the community members involved in it. It's not really about drills and exercises.
So with that said, we didn't make this change in the draft presented, but we really ought to reconsider the title of the policy. It is no longer a fire drill policy. My recommendation is to call it school safety drills. And
Okay.
leave it at that because that's going to be the more broad and all-encompassing about drilling.
Drills, when you said school safety, but you put drills, and I was like, okay, yeah.
With respect to the policy purpose, we've refocused the purpose away from fire drills and to promoting ensuring we have a safe environment for our students and staff. We've added definitions, as you can see, for district emergency plan, drill, local school emergency plan, and school emergency. And so you're aware the definition for school emergency aligns with the same definition as used in our regulations with respect to emergency closures. So we're trying to, consistent with our practice of having definitions that apply across the board.
Can you go back to the policy purpose? Sure. The blue wording, to acknowledge the Board of Education of Frederick County's the board commitment to promote a safe environment culture within, sorry, I have to read the whole thing out loud to see if it makes, because it does, in my head, it's not making sense. Within the Frederick County FCPS fostering
The board's commitment to fostering safety in our schools, basically.
but it doesn't seem to me to be a complete sentence. That's the one, to acknowledge.
That's how we framed a lot of our policy purposes, is to do this, to do that. So yes, it seems a little odd, and believe me, I had to play it in my head multiple times before I could fully accept that it made sense the way written.
Okay,
And
it's still not making sense. I feel like there needs to be, this is what we're gonna do. Like, it's sort of, maybe, I don't know, but if that's what you've usually done, then I just haven't noticed that.
You're thinking of an action statement?
So if you look in your notes, because I've closed the ones we've already looked at, but if you look at the next one, which is 208, you'll see that the purposes are to establish a data governance framework, to establish countywide standards. That's what the purpose of that policy is. So we do use that to do something structure for many of our policy purposes. I wouldn't say we do it for all of them. I'm confident that there are others.
You know what may be a small change that may help? What if it was in order to foster? Is it the act, I don't know what the right term is, the active, what do you call an ing verb?
It's just like.
But I wonder if, I think as you read it, it's saying, the board's commitment to do this in order to foster physical, mental health, wellness, safety, and security. I don't know if that's the.
And if you've done it on a bunch,
Yeah.
then and maybe it's the policy purpose is to establish, that kind of flows from policy
Yeah.
purpose, so.
I just look at acknowledge and establish as totally two different words. You know, if we're using that phrase, to establish, well, we're establishing, where we're just here, we're just acknowledging. I'd almost, maybe the Board of Education is committed to promoting a safe environment and culture within.
Yeah,
We can certainly play with the wording, as long as the concept is the concept you want to express in the purpose. We can adjust, we can, massage the wording and work on it for assuming this gets.
Yeah, I just don't love the word to acknowledge.
I agree. I think
I
the
would-
purpose is to establish.
Yeah, I'd prefer it say the Board of Education is committed to promoting a safe environment, da-da-da-da-da.
yeah, I agree.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes. So I always think, like, if you're trying to figure out if it makes sense, if someone was to ask you the question, what is the purpose of this policy? What would you say in response? To acknowledge the board, right? Or to demonstrate, or to,
Maybe not promote, maybe it is established.
right, or establish, or, yeah. That's what that statement is
Not
answering.
promote.
Yeah, we could say the Board of Education is committed to establishing a safe environment.
Establish. I need a thesaurus.
We can,
Ensuring,
like I said, we can wordsmith it and come up, we'll stay within the concept.
Okay.
And, reframe it so it's a little more understandable.
Okay.
Otherwise, if you say ensuring, I'm sure the lawyers don't like that, because then it gets into the thing, they get into negotiations to the extent possible.
I like action verbs. I think establish sounds more action than, establish or acknowledge, we're establishing, we're gonna do this, we're making this part of our environment.
Yeah,
part
it's a
of our
stronger
culture.
statement on behalf of the board of the what.
And not to nitpick words, but establishing sounds like we haven't done it before.
Well, that's true.
And this is what we've always done, it's just we're making sure the public knows.
Explaining it into, a different way.
It's kind of why I
We
like
just take it,
commitment.
we say the Board of Education, Frederick County, word commitment is committed to a safe environment and culture within the Frederick County Public Schools.
Yeah,
fostering-
we don't have to say promote or establish, we can just say is
We're
committed
a safe-
to.
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's more of a what.
To express the commitment to,
yeah.
keep that to structure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to be difficult.
Not at all. This is why we do this, so we have the policy that you all want us to present to the full board.
Don't want AI running us out of a job.
right?
I'm not worried just yet.
Speaking of that, when are we, no.
Microsoft Copilot, have you guys?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's like ChatGPT, yeah, I know.
Yeah, they're all like,
know, I love that.
I
Fascinating.
used it for a project I have with a leadership class.
Jeeves and all of them, man.
I don't know anything
I think
about
they're
it.
all good starting
I'm
points.
a little addicted
Yeah,
to
they are.
They're all over the place.
It was a good starting
They
point.
can all be good starting points, but
Interesting to see the different answers you'll get.
Yes.
You get different answers.
You have to learn how to use
They're
it.
Right. Somewhat.
verities, heady and the way it's framed.
Say, tell me the 10 things I really
so
need to know about this.
bringing us back.
Okay, back to, Back to policy
Back to
410.
policy 410, because AI and fire drills are not necessarily
Right,
the subject
right.
area.
So
Maybe-
I did
maybe we
wanna-
can pin that for when we get to our data security conversation. We can have some AI conversation there.
I did want to get to one thing that came up during Scott's presentation to the board around school safety, that we had, I particularly, had conversations around lockdown, hold, you know. Should we define that somewhere? Is it defined in regulation? I would just like
It's
to,
gotta
I think it's curious that the public would like to know, when we say schools are on hold, or they're on lockdown, or the public doesn't know what the,
You have an extensive
One of
website.
the conversations we've had was Regulation 200-29 is this regulation that we focus on in SEMD, Safety and Emergency Management Department. And it was to broaden that regulation to include definitions of each of the drills.
We had originally talked about, is the policy the right place? But where we landed was, that's really sort of an operational aspect, that if it changes, this framework doesn't direct that, but we use the standard response protocol that is currently promulgated by the I Love You Guys Foundation. And so if there's tweaks to that in a year, we don't want to come back to the policy, right? We're still meeting the framework of the policy, but we can update it in the regulation. And certainly it's already on our website and any of our messaging that we send to the community, we link to it. So it's an awareness, but I agree with you that the regulation is probably, that was our recommendation for why we said, let's not include it in the policy.
So you have
Yeah.
that reference in the bottom, could that just be put into that D?
that's what I'd like to,
C
could we
regulation.
just put something in D where it says reference?
I don't
So
know
they
if there's a
know.
reference to fire drills on that SEMD site.
So
Right.
We talked about that.
what we can do, because, and we do this in other places, under D5, where the board is directing the superintendent to provide regulations, we can include definitions of, and we'll figure out what the right way to frame that is. But we do from time to time have the board direct the superintendent to make sure certain things are included in the regulation. You're going to see it tonight when we get to the board meeting. We have that included in our in one of the policies that's up for first reading. So we can incorporate something like that in D5. So to make sure that you're concerned that these things get defined, so that the community will see in your policy and say, okay, I need to go jump over to the regulation to see it.
Perfect.
Even as a teacher, I'd be like, okay, what do we do for this one? Lights off, door shut, and things have changed a lot, but.
So, moving back up to the definitions, I think we've covered those. We'll move into the policy statement. Statement 1 is an acknowledgement of the importance of emergency preparedness. Statement 2, this is a variation, Ms. Allen, of what you had shared coming out of the last meeting. Yours focused on fire drills. We're taking away the fire drill focus. But this is a statement of the board's recognition that drilling is important, that there are good lessons to be learned, and not just generally as part of maintaining a safe environment, but just as part of learning how to follow instructions in a high-stress situation. And I think those were your words, Ms. Allen, and we thought they were apt and appropriate to incorporate.
I forgot about them.
I think that's a great
Really
paragraph.
good.
I think that's a great paragraph.
And there was another bill having to do with safety for, I think it was specifically disabled students.
Oh, yeah.
And I did point out that as a teacher, formerly in schools, typically it was hardly ever, I know Tuscarora had one of those Tuscarora Elementary had one of those evacu-tracks. I don't know when it was ever used for practice. Drills are typically not done during lunchtime, and so it'd be for practical reasons but I always did have concern, like what would happen if an emergency came up at lunch? Would people? You're not in the regular scheme of things, and then students would always say, "Is this a drill?" Like fire drill or whatever. Is this a drill? And I'd kind of chuckle and say, it is because what they meant was, is this real? And so I'd say it is a drill. A drill is a practice. I don't know if it's real or not. And actually, in every school I was at, I think we actually ended up having something real. And so we explain to the students, you just practice because you never know. But some of those other situations, so that I think is why that legislation has been raised, because I think there have been times, and I believe if you, I'm trying to remember, this is vague now, I think I had a special ed teacher talk to me about that one time, maybe even Rock Creek, students with mobility issues. It's not clear that they really necessarily would get them all out. And don't take that as gospel, it might not have been Rock Creek, but some teacher at some point did talk to me about that. So I mentioned that not for the policy, and I apologize, but just.
So that brings up a question. Is that addressed in regulation or procedures if we have a student who is, say, wheelchair bound and is on the second or third floor of a school?
Every school that has its multi-level is required to have at least one evacuatrack.
Okay.
We do have them in all the schools. They're placed in locations that are identified by the administration as the ideal locations for them. And the staff from the health department who actually conduct the training, they train our staff. Their recommendation, we've communicated with them, their recommendation is to not place students into the evacuatracks for drills, just out of consideration for their conditions. So we communicate with them. And then from a standpoint of, you're thinking about Rock Creek and other schools that have students with limited mobility, my team meets with them and we'll go over with administrators ideas and plans of what they would do. So shelter locations, depending upon the scenario, shelter locations within the building initially, and then ways to safely get them out of the building if they need to evacuate. And then we even go as far as communicating with the emergency responders that these are where the students with the most difficult disabilities or most difficult issues, where they would need to, so they can prioritize them to go to them first.
I'm very glad to hear all that. And it may be that some of that just doesn't get communicated to the classroom teachers. That can happen. But obviously it's happening in other places as well. But I'm very, and then I forget, it's been 7 years since I was a teacher in the building, that things have changed. So good to hear.
Communicate and collaborate with the administration pretty much every day.
Good. Thank you for that.
So turning to the implementation section, paragraph 1, the board is directing the superintendent to create emergency plans and local school emergency plans. The reality is we have them. They're not something we have not already created, but it is the direction to create them. And in the context of a new School 41, elementary school 41, this would be the direction that this would have to follow to create the school emergency plan for that particular school. Paragraph 2 articulates your expectation for things that will be in those two versions of the plans. Addressing violent or traumatic events on school grounds, dealing with contingencies of man-made technology and natural hazards, aligning with MSDE, Maryland Center for School Safety, and internally developed emergency planning guidelines. That is your expectation that the emergency plans we create will align. Under 3 drills, the only language that was in the original policy was that very short paragraph A. We are eliminating all of it because we are obviously a much more comprehensive policy now, assuming this gets passed. This is articulating the board's focus on making sure we will conduct the drills, that we will have an annual schedule. It lists the minimum drills that we will conduct, and again, I want to ask the question, do we want to include this in the policy? Not to say that we aren't going to continue to conduct 8 drills, but if the prevailing wisdom becomes 6 drills, now we have to do 8 drills. Not to say we're not going to practice a drop, cover, and hold, but if drop, cover, and hold becomes an outdated nomenclature and it's no longer called drop, cover, and hold, or because a whole new structure is created, do we want to bind ourselves in the policy to those items? Those to me seem more like items that are regulatory and that we would include in the regulation, which has a lot more flexibility for adjustment.
Yeah.
We included them because our takeaway from our discussion previous was that you wanted them here. But I'm asking that question again.
Scott, how often have they changed, just for perspective? Minimum requirements and the terms?
Fire drills, they haven't changed since I've been here, since 2016. Fire drills and the other drills are required. The only one that's been added is the active assailant, active shooter drill that has slowly come into like mandated, LEAs have mandated them. I agree with Mr. Blivis, and I think it absolutely makes sense. The only one caveat that I would provide is that right now legislation law says that if a building is fully covered by a sprinkler system, you only have to do 5 fire drills in that building. And then if a building is not fully covered, you have to do 8. And I think that that's confusing because staff might move from one building to another, administrators might move from one building to another and not realize exactly whether they're fully covered or they're not fully covered. So my recommendation has been to just go to that 8 fire drills so that across the board we're consistent. So that would be the only thing, caveat that I would say is right now legislation has 2 different numbers.
And that could stay, the choice of 8 could stay in the regulation. I mean, there's no reason why the superintendent would have to change that.
Because isn't this the opportunity where we could eliminate all of those and just say each school will complete the minimum number of, say, da-da-da-da-da, based upon, but then we can add our
Required
little,
drills.
but then we can add our little caveat for, they can refer to
Yes.
regulation,
Yes.
Yeah, because you need the ease of
a
being.
list of drills and definitions.
Yes, I would like that there as well. I
Yeah.
just-
That makes
We
sense.
can make the cross-reference there to the
Yeah.
regulation.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And I will tell you that the current regulation number is likely to change to align with this. And so what we will put in the policy will be what will be the new regulation number, even if it won't actually link to that regulation until that regulation has been,
Okay.
Is that regulation coming up in the fall?
it would be in the fall, yeah. And realistically, by the time this gets in front of
The fall anyway.
the board, this will be the fall anyway before it gets in front of the board. So.
Okay.
But we'll know when one of our board members says that hyperlink doesn't work. We're right, you're right, it doesn't?
The regulation will be changing.
Yes.
So in E, it says, FCPS shall maintain records of the safety and emergency management incidents and drills that occur. Where are those records kept?
We have a drill and incident reporting form that all the schools do it, and it downloads. It's a mock form. Click on that link, there answer all the questions, and it saves it all, and this way we can run reports and have all the data.
A mock form is like an online Google form. It's just using a different platform.
Okay,
So you house all
Maintained
those?
in SEMD.
So not the schools, okay.
so,
I assume those are subject to inspection of the fire marshal and other people who want to make sure we've done it.
yeah, I was
My
just gonna
best
say,
friend,
and
the
do
fire
they,
marshal.
are they?
Oh, yeah, they
are
are.
required to submit those to the fire marshal or any other entity outside of Frederick County Public Schools?
So at the end of every year, at the beginning, during summer, we submit certain data points that we collect to Maryland Center for School Safety and MSDE. The fire marshal says have it on hand if we ask for it.
But not audit, yeah.
That would be typical.
Just like on the front end, there's an attestation that the superintendent has to send to the state that we have the district plan and the LSEP as well.
Okay.
Okay.
I was facetious, but I have a thing with fire marshals. Inconsistency, but
I always think of Fire Marshal Bill.
the actual fire marshals are nice. I did a ride along, but that's funny.
And
I can't. That's like
living
a
color
an
reference.
imprint of
Wow.
There we go.
Taking me back. Definitely taking it back. So paragraph 4 speaks to board expected communications. These are required by statute, so we can include them or not because we're required to do them anyway because they are a part of the law, that we provide information about the state's firearm storage laws, and that we provide a schedule of active shooter drills and trainings to parents at the start of the year, and then notify parents after the drill has taken place. This is statutory. There's not much change there. And then 5 is just the direction to create the regulation, which we will amend to reflect the instruction to include those definitions. So unless you have other questions, the recommendation is to advance this to the board with the proposed edits.
I just have one suggestion. Do we want to state that those records are maintained at the central office or in the office of SEMD?
No, it just says FCPS. We can indicate that they're at SEMD.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
yeah, just to, it eliminates a question.
That was to say, we had the question? Or we eliminate that? All right, I'll move that we move it forward.
Second.
All right, all in favor? And that's unanimous.
So can I revisit real quickly? So policy 111, so that is going to go on the review schedule?
That will go on the when we get to the 100 series.
Okay.
So we're roughly 2 years.
Okay.
That will probably change from the direction from the state, will probably change multiple
Yeah, I was
times.
just
Get
going to
done
say,
anyway.
it's stuff that we may be forced to look at sooner than that.
And if that's the case, then
Put it on.
we will put it on.
Yep. All right, 1.07, policy 208 and policy 442.
Policy 442 is a decommission. You're provided a copy of it so you can see what we've done with it. Data security is the real, 208 is the real meat of this conversation. 442 was originally presented to the policy committee on September 25th. At the time, we discussed a focus on the local cybersecurity acts, data security, and privacy protection of information. There was an ask to make sure we have increased reference to Maryland law and compliance with Maryland's Department of Information Technology standards. On January 22nd, staff presented an update to 208 incorporating some portion of 442, but we needed to do some more work with 208, which is what we told you at the time. And we have now done that work. At the time, on January 22nd, our conversation focused on the Power School breach, technical changes with school-issued devices, unauthorized uploads, and third-party subscriptions. Because of the technical nature of this, I'm actually not going to walk you through it. I'm going to let you kind of swim and sink on your own.
Okay.
No, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Gardner, who is our subject matter expert on all things IT, and ask him to walk you through the policy.
Okay, great.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, as we talked about back in January, the goal was to address to combine the two policies and address the broad nature of what information security is. The original policy was written with the context of the specifically Student Data Privacy Act of 2015, which was very, very specific in governing how the responsibility of third-party vendors when we share data with them, which is only one aspect of what we do. So in updating the policy, first thing we did, as you see, is address the definitions. FCPS as a large organization that deals with student and staff data and operational data. We have many different data types we collect that all have specific legislative and legal frameworks of how we are supposed to behave when we collect that data and when we're using that data. Things like federal tax information, private health information, payment card information, those types of things all have specific legal frameworks in Maryland and in federal law that we're required to follow. So what we did was we took the definitions section and we incorporated the broader framework of all the different data types we collect, from not just student data to staff and adult private information to federal tax information, educational records. So we expanded that section to ensure that the board's policy and the subsequent regulations are aligned with our overall governance requirements. We also updated the definitions to ensure that it's understood that protecting information is not just technical. It's administrative, it's physical, and it's technical. Technology is just one aspect. A lot of protecting data is behavioral. It's how you behave when you're dealing with data and things like that. So that's all captured in those definitions. Any questions on the definitions section? Okay, We have a lot of different data types that we do collect. And some of it is not exactly, even though it's defined in law that we have requirements, it's not exact, it can be nebulous. Like, we have privileged information, which is information that needs to be protected because while it is information that we collect, it is information that only a limited number of staff are supposed to have access to. For example, privileged information would be like board negotiation information. Not everybody in FCPS has access to it, probably doesn't have access to it until specific legal retention requirements are met. So that being said, in the policy statement, we just made some minor updates to how that was worded. Once again, we're trying to capture the understanding that it's not just a technical requirement, and it's not just focused specifically on just student data. It is on all information that we collect and we manage and we're responsible for. Then going into the implementation section, just updates, once again, keeping that same theme through. This is an organization-wide requirement. This touches everything we do. And the requirement to maintain what we have, which is a 300-page written information security program, which aligns with what we're legally audited to maintain by the state and federal, and was recodified and more specifically defined in the Maryland Local Cybersecurity Support Act of 22. So that document, I had the physical book here before, but it's available for FCPS staff, but it defines the process that aligns with Maryland State Department of Information Technology, which we're audited by, and all federal requirements such as NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. With that being said, open to any questions, thoughts, concerns?
This is dense.
Yeah.
Most of what I
This is dense.
Right, a lot.
There's a lot of regulations that back this up too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well,
That's not a bad thing, that was not a negative, that was a positive.
yeah. Yeah, it's an area that can be so fraught, as you well know, fighting out there, you know, like ninjas fighting all the things coming down at us all the time.
A lot of what this boils down to, what we deal with, is risk management. We are dealing with the likelihood an event will happen and the impact should that event happen.
Yeah.
90% of what I do all day is trying to play with that equation. I'm trying to minimize the likelihood an event will happen, and when an event does happen, minimize the impact should that event happen. And it gets very dense when you get into the specifics of how we do all of that and the legal requirements to do that. It gets very dense, but at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to do is manage risk.
And what are, oh, I'm sorry.
No.
What are our training requirements for teachers, administrators, central office staff on personally identifiable information and that type of thing?
So we have an annual training course through Safe Schools that all staff are required to do annually. In addition to that, myself and my team are constantly trying to put out additional training resources and information. I'm always going around anytime I'm at a meeting. I offer to come to any school or any department and say I'm willing to come and answer questions and things like that. So part of a large portion of what we're doing, like I said, is not just technical. It would be easy if I could just check a box and we're secure. It's a lot of it's behavioral. So a lot of it is being willing to be open to have those conversations. And that's where a lot of the back and forth happens, because a lot of people, they're used to how they want to do business, and a lot of this is changing how you do your day-to-day work.
Do you still trick, I'm sorry,
No,
you had a question before.
No, you're good.
I think at one point in time, if people clicked on a link, they would get their hand slapped with a message. You still do that?
Yes, we are required by law to perform,
Everyone's afraid to get
perform those
caught by
tests.
that.
Phishing test.
Yes, our phishing tests.
I
We
get
are
those all the
required
time at work.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't know if do you see it now when you all log in? There's just when you're logging in, there's,
2 boxes.
If you look at the
Reminders.
screen right there, you can see it there. There's
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
two
there it
boxes.
is, yeah.
We're working on methods to make that more user-friendly and to be able to change up that information, make it more visually appealing. But it's we are constantly looking for new ways to get the information in front of people and to teach them what they need to know. And hopefully, let them feel comfortable in doing their part of the job and let us do our part of the job.
So I have two things. I like what you said about the minimization of risk. That's the kind of the purpose of this policy is to create an environment within the school system that minimizes the risk to the school system. So I'm wondering if we can't incorporate some of that language into the policy purpose. I don't know if you guys are in agreement with that.
And it would be helpful if the board is collectively in the policy states what their risk tolerance is, because it's, the entire framework changes. It's designed to adjust depending on the organization. When I first came here, it was after a data breach, and the board's direction was, we have 0 risk tolerance. So I'm supposed to behave a specific way. But if you're working for a tech startup, they have high risk tolerance. So they allow a lot of things that typically you wouldn't do in a low risk environment. So the board, I believe we still are operating under a low minimum risk tolerance from board direction. So that being said, that dictates how we go, what we permit and don't permit, the way we perform our work.
If the board's interest is incorporating a risk threshold, which Mr. Gardner is suggesting, I would say that would fall as a policy statement and not a policy purpose.
Okay.
Because
All
there,
right.
I'm looking at-
there you're
Yeah.
specifically saying,
That's
this
right.
is the position we're taking
Okay.
on the level of risk we're willing to accept with respect to information technology.
Okay, I don't, and I do have a question too, but I'll let this conversation play out for you guys.
I'm in agreement,
No, I
yeah.
think especially
Yeah,
if
no, I agree.
Mr. Gardner thinks that we should be in there, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So what is your threshold then? Are we staying with the 0
I
threshold?
would say lowest risk possible.
Low risk tolerance is the appropriate term.
Okay.
We usually go low, moderate, or
For
high.
this environment,
So low, moderate, or higher, the technical terms we usually use when we're defining it, so a low risk tolerance is an appropriate statement.
So we can incorporate that.
right? And we have, where I work, we have an outside IT contractor who manages our system, our network system. And they force a quarterly training program. So we have to take these, it's usually 15, 20 minutes. We have to sit there. And if we fail, we have to go through additional training.
Yeah.
So,
Same thing.
yeah, okay. So, I mean, and it's mandatory, like you can't skip it. So, like, you get reported basically if you don't.
Yes, I spent 2 decades in the private sector before I came to FCPS and was brought in to implement those types of practices. We have the annual, but a lot of what we've dealt with is balancing the time that staff spend on their professional learning and what's incorporated, and that decision is, I make suggestions. A quarterly kind of thing. Any increased training is always a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
In this particular thing, it's just, you link to their site that has the training videos there.
And that,
Do that
at the
training.
beginning of the year, before school starts, we all, I can't say I got it this year, but we've all in the past gotten it.
I've
certainly.
done it
Yes.
for
But
FCPS.
what
but-
he's saying is the balance is between, there's time given to do that. When you get to the school year, it starts to get really hard to find time. So that's the balance of what can we get people to do that we can give them time to do without them saying, oh, good golly, not another one, because I've got all this to do. But based on that, are there other areas that you're seeing that are a constant problem that you would like to incorporate something more for the protection of the system?
And some of that we're trying to address on a more targeted basis, such as repeat offenders who fail the phishing test receive additional communication from the supervisor and are requested to demonstrate an understanding of those habits. So we're trying to target things so that way we're not doing it as a carte blanche kind of, but at the same time, there is always more training that could be done on the general best practices, on understanding that one of the big issues we deal with, and most organizations deal with, is called shadow IT, which is what I have, the tools I have available to me that are provided by my organization. I don't like this, I don't like how it does it, I prefer this that I use at home, and you just start using that for your work. And that can cause issues. So training individuals that we're dealing with all these protected information types, and there's things that we have legal requirements to govern this, and doing those types of things is inappropriate.
So one of the things that we are doing because of the time factor and not having infinite time to do training is we are getting more proactive. That's what's led to the 2 boxes on the screen when we're gonna cycle messages through there. We're also preparing information that we can send in newsletters that can go to teachers, that can go to the community, kind of to raise awareness of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what the rules are, and to give an understanding. Because I think that's one of the biggest problems with IT security is they don't understand why it's tight. Why does it have to be a certain way? And so by spreading the message and helping people understand why we do what we do and how it is set up, and then what the permissions are, really to build an environment where they're used to operating in.
Yeah, because, from the top part, I get all that, absolutely. But from our view, of course, and all of us in this room, it's like, yeah, do you know the millions of dollars it can cost us? Do you know the damage to students and staff if their information gets out there? So I think everybody's more aware of that, but just not think, but the money is not always like holding you hostage and paying a ransom. I don't know that everybody always thinks about that one. So, okay. Now, with the messages, is there, I don't get those, first of all. But secondly, is there anything that says they have to read them before they move on? Or
Every time they log in? You mean the messages on this?
yeah, that they're
I mean, well, you can't really,
Right, well, we're working on methods of ways to send out certain communications and receive some of that type of feedback statistics. Right now, it's a passive, it's there, hopefully they read it. We do have like the what we call the banner warning disclaimer, where if you hit Control-Alt-Delete and it comes up with the base legal requirement. This is a federal, this is FCPS's information system. There's no reasonable expectation of privacy, those kinds of things. The base legal statements that you do have to click OK before you can enter your username and password. But we are working on methods of improving that. But all those types of methods do take time, resources, and we're kind of tight on both.
completely understood. I can just guarantee you most people aren't going to read all that verbiage.
Yes, no, I
Ken,
completely understand.
what is a optimal failure rate? And I mean, it's sort of the idea is that we're going to have some degree of people who fail phishing tests. What's the industry standard for about what is sort of the comfortable risk assessment? What % of your employees that failing?
For a low tolerance, 1% to 2%.
1% to 2% failing. And what is our rate?
I think our last test was around 9%,
9? Okay.
which is an improvement.
Good improvement, because I thought once you told me it was like in the double
We
digits.
have, yes, last year we had a 20%
Yeah, I was
failure.
going to say, I thought it was 20%. Okay. So that says that some of what you've put in place.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a pretty good direction
No,
to have.
we were resuming the program at that point in time, which we had placed the program on hold during COVID because
Yeah, sure.
we didn't want people to get locked out while they were remotely working.
Yeah.
And working with Cabinet, we re-implemented the program. We're required by law and by our insurance company to do it. So, but the manner in which we've done it, we've increased the frequency. And like I said, we've increased the resources that should someone fail, some of the resources available to them to learn for the next time.
And how do they report phishing emails?
So if you right-click on the email and you go to, it's report spam and it says spam or junk. I think it's report junk and then.
So they have to physically click on the email and
Yes.
click right-click?
You right-click on the email.
Okay. I just wondered, because at my company, we have a button at the top of the bar
Yes.
that's already there all the time.
And that's a
Once you
third-party service you
highlight
can
it.
buy that will integrate with it.
Gotcha.
We, trying to save money, we're using the one that's
Gotcha.
embedded
That was great.
in Microsoft right now.
Thank you for that
But I
information.
do wonder, my question was going to be, how many people know how to do that?
Well, we are seeing that increase over time too. That's another statistic we do track in our phishing test is not only the failure rate, but also the report rate as well.
Okay, good.
This is really, I think, my question is outside of this data security, but is there a privacy statement that we have, that's implemented, that there's no expectation of privacy?
That's part of that initial banner. When you hit Control-Delete and it comes up and you have to click OK before you enter username password, it does state that there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. The system is actively monitored. That does not mean we are active. I do not have the time nor the resources to sit there and stare at what everybody's doing all the time, despite what people think. We're not doing that, but it does enable us, when something does happen and is reported, we have the right and ability to recreate what happened.
To investigate.
Well, on the other side, I know the union always told us, you know, any of this can be FOIA'd, so, or PIA'd.
Yeah.
So there's also that.
We respond to those quite regularly.
Yeah, okay.
So if there are no other questions, the recommendation is to advance this to the board with edits.
I will move that we advance it to the board.
And all in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Appreciate your hard work.
Yeah,
That was
thank
a lot of
you.
work. Thank you.
1.08.
08, that brings us through the
26.
items that had actions associated with them. And while Ms. Claybaugh and Ms. Rawlinson come on over to talk about fundraising, I want to thank the panel members for agreeing to start this meeting a little early. I had some angst and anxiety about making sure we had sufficient time to complete all of this, because we're about to shift our gears a little bit and we're going to get into some real heavy discussions, and I wanted to clear the deck, so to speak, to make sure we didn't have anything hanging around policy committee. And coming out of this meeting now, we really won't. There'll be 2 policies that will have been discussed through information discussion that will have to come forward in the near future for actual review. But we really cleared the deck of everything else besides that one, which is the school partnerships, and then the fundraising one. Those are really the last 2 before we get to this next wave. So I really appreciate you accommodating my anxiety about making sure that we can get all of that done.
And did you talk to the board about adding in a meeting just to?
We discussed it, and at this point, we've made a decision not to do
Not
that.
to, okay, because
Yeah.
we have done that in the past
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
So policy 426, fundraising in schools. This is the first time it's before the policy committee. It was adopted in 2006 and last revised in 2019. Again, not one of our oldest policies, but the revision is still 6 years old. We are here to discuss with you this policy and understand what your interest is in making revisions. And I am going to just turn the floor over to our 2 subject matter experts, Ms. Claybaugh and Ms. Rawlinson.
So I think one of the things behind the policy is to understand that there is a robust regulation. So you look at this policy and you go, well, there's not a lot said here. But there is a robust regulation that we are actually in the process at RRC reviewing and finalizing that information. So, you know, as far as, you know, I don't know in regards, Melissa, if there were updates that you wanted to, anything that we wanted to in particular that we felt needed to be updated.
I do feel that even though the policy is somewhat intentionally vague and then the regulation is more detailed, I do recommend that we put some policy statements in place that just really kind of codifies and reinforces what the current position is on a couple things.
So people not stealing money?
That might be, you know.
To put it in a more diplomatic way, that we have appropriate audit controls.
There we go.
Internal control.
Still correct.
So I do.
When you work more closely with your employees, you can be a lot more blunt.
So I do feel like there could be some revisions to the policy for sure. I don't know if it's at this point.
Yeah, you can, and we have nothing in writing, so.
Right. No, this is just a discussion about, so feel free to share.
Do the controls go in the regulation, or do
Yes.
controls
Correct.
go in, you know, it's like, I mean, we can make a statement around, we'll ensure that these controls are in place. kind of
Controls
thing.
are in the regulation. They're also in, because a lot of this takes place through our student activity fund. We have a robust student activity fund manual. And we've always done annual training on it. Now our student activity fund coordinator and our compliance officer are actually they've done, are they doing the in-person ones this week? Yes, on Friday. We have in-person trainings that are mandatory this week. We've done some other trainings that have been virtual. And so, yeah, so it happens in multiple places, and it's also affirmed through the trainings that we offer. Last summer, we did fraud training with our principals at the mandatory summer principal meetings. There were 3 options for the principals to do that. We also did that with our school-based secretaries and central office secretaries, and we continue to do that. There's just, it's good practice. And, we live our lives in internal controls and fiscal services, specifically in financial reporting. So the more opportunities we have to reinforce it, it's what we live and breathe every day. But the others, the school administrators live and breathe that as well, but it's in a different way, where we're looking really at the fiscal transactions that are happening. So yes, so it will, my long way to get there is yes, it lives in regulation, but it's also then backed up by the manuals as well.
And so the place for the board on that would be to emphasize the importance of having audit controls without directing what those audit controls look like, because that's what lives in the regulation and in the manual, what it looks like. You're going to tell us this is important to us that we have this.
Yeah, you and the public.
Right, and I think we provided to the board an email maybe 2 weeks ago in regards to, we, in the budget cycle, I think 24, we were able to add the compliance officer. So we were able to now bring the auditing and review of the student activity funds in-house, which I think we have found already it has been a much better idea, because financial transactions in a school system are very different. Governmental accounting are very different, and if you're not well versed in that, there's a learning curve. And the person who is our compliance officer is a long-standing governmental accountant, and has had years of experience not only with FCPS but also with our neighbor LEA. She came to us from another LEA, so we found that that's already been very well done and very well received. But I will say, much like most things that happen in operations, we have a human capital deficit. And so it would be lovely if we had additional staffing to help it. So the calendar that we have is robust, and it is also looking at what our deficiencies are in regards to having the number of people to do that, which is why we've been using things like training, mass group training, to help to enforce what's happening, the compliance officers.
That's when you said training in person on Friday, I'm like, what it seems like an odd time to do it. You better hope those people stay and then take that training into the fall. I don't know.
Well, no, because they're doing the work every day. So it's the school-based secretaries that will be participating in the training. So they will do that every day. We do then have a summer in-service day that we offer at the end of July, and we strategically place that in July because we know there's a lot of turnover that happens once the new
That was
starts. And so we do that. Plus, our Student Activity Fund coordinator does a lot of in-person training. So as new secretaries come on board, as new principals come on board, there's a lot of reach out to make sure, because, especially at the high school level, the number of transactions that happen, even at a small elementary school, the number of transactions that happen in the student activity funds are significant. So that we're trying at every turn to offer whatever assistance we can offer. In fiscal services, we spend a lot of time doing customer services, and our customers are typically the schools.
I was going to say, typically classroom teachers are buffered from that, especially now. I mean, in Montgomery County, I used to sub there when they still collected lunch money. Frederick County was already away from that at that point. But I did do Destination Imagination, and that caused me to interact with the secretary, and I kind of learned what pressure and how, like, they're just kind of, very about it. So anything you can give them, and they feel that pressure, which is good.
Can I just make a quick remark on the training on Friday? It's really about gearing up for year-end close.
Okay.
And what's required.
Okay.
But we will take an opportunity, as we always do, to just mention internal controls, reminder, just making sure that we have that on the forefront of our conversations. But it's really geared towards year-end.
That makes a lot of sense.
But we do,
Yeah.
as Heather mentioned, we go and do one-on-one trainings, seasoned or definitely hit the new folks when they come in multiple times to make sure that they're comfortable. We go back out, we audit them within 6 months to make sure things are being done appropriately. I will give mad kudos to the compliance officer. She's visited, or at the end of the year, slated to schedule 41 site visits. And we visit the high schools twice because they're so large. We do a sample basis at the high school level. And I think at the middle school level depends on transactions, volume of transactions. But at the elementary school, we usually hit every transaction, put eyes on deposits and disbursements. So we've come a long way. And having someone internal really is vested and knowledgeable about our policies and procedures and internal controls. Whereas when we contracted out with that contract auditor, it was more of a checklist. So the eyes to the books are not as robust as they are today. So we're thankful for that.
And we have had, I know that we're kind of off topic, but I will say we really appreciate the IIAA. Their lead for the IIAA, Tricia Reaver, has assisted us when we were going through transition and helped us by doing some of our SAF audits. And so it's nice because we already have a really great working relationship with her. It was wonderful to have that independent eye as we were starting to bring it in-house to assist us with any type, what she was seeing in regards to that. So they've been very helpful in regards to that as well. They're a great resource.
Great partners.
What about the independent booster program, boosters?
So, of course, the first word you said is the most important word. They are independent. They are at arm's length from us. We do, in the regulation, if they are fundraising on behalf, it should have an approval by the principal. If it's something that has to do with any type of capital improvement, that has to follow our regulation on building modifications and has to always be pre-approved. But our goal is to remember that they are not an FCPS organization. While they do serve our students, they are independent of us. So we try to make sure that it is a partnership. We actually do have a boosters manual, and we are in the process of getting ready to review that again to ensure that we have all of that updated as we finish up these regulations. The donation regulation is under review right now, as well as our fundraising regulation. And once they're done, that will help us with some of the work of updating the boosters manual.
How long has that been around?
Boosters manual?
It was actually, I think, a COVID project, so I think.
Okay,
we
thank you.
started that back
I was
in
gonna say, I don't remember that when I was doing money for various.
It's a fairly new project, and when boosters, we appreciate the support that boosters offer. When it comes to building modifications, especially when it's athletic boosters, we have to be concerned about, building modifications, we're always concerned, right? Because we have to maintain it. But when athletics gets involved, there's always the Title IX component that we have to ensure that, if we're doing something for a boys team, we are doing the like things for a girls team. It's, an easy thing is like a dugout project. If you're gonna do it for the baseball team, you would have to do it for the softball team. Or if you're gonna do it for the softball team, you would have to do it for the baseball team to ensure that we have similar facilities available to the students. So we've been working to really, in conjunction with the executive director of facilities maintenance and the COO to tighten up any type of building modifications to ensure that we are able that we're, compliance of all the rules and regulations that an organization such as FCPS has to follow.
And another
Definitions for those groups.
And we can certainly incorporate
Yeah.
definitions in here.
This is our initial discussion, just to begin the process.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, because I think this is just, this is one of the more difficult things we do, because one, unfortunately, boosters have run across
Yeah.
more fraud than we'd care, and because their name implies
Yeah,
Oakdale boosters,
right.
Urbana boosters, it always reflects on us, even though they're a separate 501c3 or however they're filed. It always reflects on us and what our controls are over, I guess my question, I have a lot of questions, but our question is, do we have restrictions on allowing them to use that, Oakdale boosters or Urbana boosters?
We do incorporate into the draft regulation a requirement that they get approval to use any of our logo or trademarked information. And separately, we are working on updating the trademark regulation, and my office, in particular, Ms. Chesney, she's been very helpful in making sure we are setting up a system to stay on top of our protected rights with respect to that. So we are incorporating that into the regulation to make sure we get that in place.
Yeah. Because anything we can do to emphasize our detachment from that.
Yeah, it was just.
Because there's always that gray area, and I admit that I was part of the problem maybe when I was coaching, is that we fundraised as a team to travel. Like we had a tournament every Christmas, and we would fundraise in order to take our kids to the Eastern Shore. And then we would also receive assistance from the boosters, but we also internally got approval through the principal and fundraised. So how do we address that? The balance of Title IX, where the boys team gets to go here and the girls team gets to stay home, or, how do we?
I think that runs beyond the scale of this. But if,
I look at, I give what might be considered an affluent school, Urbana, we always sent the girls and the boys to the Eastern Shore. But I'm aware of programs, not pulling any out, but where we would see the boys team at the Eastern Shore tournament, but the girls team was at Century High at a tournament. So how do
Title
we?
IX does not require exact like for like. So the example that Heather gave of a dugout for the softball team and a dugout for the baseball team, those are easy ways to say we have to be doing something for both. You can remain in compliance with Title IX if you're allocating the resources, not necessarily to the specific item.
To other
It may
areas.
be that the baseball team needs a better dugout, but the softball team needs a better scoreboard. And if the costs are roughly the same, you remain in Title IX compliance because you're improving the facility without having to necessarily improve the specific. So it may be that the Title IX is met by when we send the boys off to the Eastern Shore for a tournament. We're doing something else, hopefully, for the girls that has similar value, but maybe not as appreciated in the same way.
Okay. And we track that in regulation. We track that how?
Our athletic director, Kevin Kendrow, they do Title IX reviews to ensure. I mean, it's a regular part of their process. They routinely reach out to my office to verify, to get input and feedback on whether something is or is not Title IX compliant. It's a part of the athletic director regular process.
Is that sport specific or gender specific?
It is gender specific. Because you have a baseball team doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a softball team. It's, again, the easy comparison is baseball to softball because the sports are functionally similar. But it is not.
It's available spots and resources.
Yes, I mean, we do have sports that are specifically for our female athletes only. So field hockey is not a sport that is designated as a co-ed sport or a male sport. It is a female sport only.
Yeah.
I was surprised actually I was looking at the list not too long ago that Dr. Alavito showed me of how the sports are broken down. And I was shocked by the number of sports that were designated as female without a corresponding male. There is no male volleyball.
They have to offset football.
Interesting.
They have to offset participation within football.
And that's how they do it. And there is a co-ed wrestling and there's girls wrestling, but there is no boys wrestling.
Interesting.
Yes,
Not at all schools, though, right?
that is set by the state.
That's set by the state, that's MPSSA, yeah.
Interesting.
Wrestling is co-ed.
But it doesn't necessarily
But
have to
they
have
started
girls
girls
versus-
wrestling.
It's not a requirement, a girl would have the opportunity, why you'd want to do that, I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but.
Actually have, girls have participated in wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
I have,
And
to
then
your,
they started girls.
to your question about Title IX, in my experience, not here, but in my prior district, most of the Title IX related to things like this were about sort of like field use, so access to facilities. I've not had experience with booster-related questions, but there have been things around like just sort of access to the better field or, you know, playing times or just sort of this idea of equity, but those are still local school managed. The assignment of which team gets to practice on which field and when are all locally managed.
Girls access to the weight room and.
All of that, right, exactly.
So are
But the boosters one is the one that
yeah.
keeps me up at night sometimes when we're just appear to be associated and we're not.
I mean, and it happens with the PTAs as well, you know, it's all, there's the various organizations, and it's not just athletics boosters, there's boosters for arts, there's boosters for marching band.
And we have no audit power over those organizations.
As part of our booster regulations, we do request a copy of their financial statements.
Okay.
And we do request to know that they are in compliance, because as a 501(c), they would need to file their annual, get the number wrong,
990.
their 990s to ensure that they're in compliance. We do work our best to keep it at arm's length and try to, you know, as part of the regulations is staff should not be serving on the boards. There are times when there's assistance that's offered, but that's our goal because we do want to ensure, you know, that if the organization, that it can be kind of not only in rule but also in spirit remain at arm's length, you know, and that's very important as well. In regards to fundraiser, so like if your team did a fundraiser and it was a team like school-sponsored activity, that would run through the SAF and that would be subject to this policy and ultimately to our regulation that flows from it. If the booster is, if you're running like simultaneous at the same time, of course theirs could be outside of our review. I think typically in the booster, and you need to correct me if I'm saying this wrong, in the booster regulation or in the booster manual, they do need to be approved by the principal.
Yeah, we do require them, because keeping that arm's length, but being a partner, right?
Right.
So it's a blurred line.
Yeah.
Because we want to make sure that it's not disrupting our education and it's following our policies and our spirit of what is acceptable. We don't want them to raise funds for an initiative and then later either do something to our fields or modifications or whatever, and then we say, wait, pump the brakes. That doesn't coincide with what the board's policies and regulations are. So having an awareness and an approval lets that joint partnership happen, then proceed with the fundraising. And in perfect world, if they could just donate the money with the restriction of use of this, but not limited to, you know, then we can use it for the athletics program or the drama program or in the capacity and the spirit that the board will raise the money.
Consider a silent auction that a booster might run inside of one of our schools where they, you know, if you've ever been to a silent auction, they have all the items and you walk around and you see what you like, you put your bid down and whoever bids the most at the end of the day wins. We have a robust winery industry around here. It would be completely in violation of our system's policies for a booster to come in with a donated, you know, winery gift card or wine set of, you know, wine bottles or whatever it is that the winery wants to offer.
Highly popular, but.
It would be very popular though. It would be a great fundraiser.
Desirable.
But for the fact that it's happening in a school gym, if it's happening in our school facility. They want to do that, they can do that at the 4-H or at the Friars or wherever it is.
They rent a space.
Not on us.
Anywhere else.
The idea though is
I just had that.
we want our principals to be partnering to make sure that they understand when they, oh, you want to come use our gym? Great, we'll help you through that process, but here are the restrictions that we have to impose upon you because we have policies that say promoting alcohol use is not appropriate at a school.
And it's not just our policies, we also have state and federal policies, you know, things as related through the Food and Nutrition Services about selling outside food within the school during certain hours. And we have to ensure that those are followed because it's a school building and we are subject to the USDA or COMAR policies surrounding that. And our principals and our fiscal services team or other parts of our operations team, that's why we always like to have the pre-approval opportunity, because when we have that, we can say, well, yes, you can sell this, but it has to be after 4 o'clock when the building is technically closed.
Yeah.
Because of the COMAR regulations behind Food and Nutrition Services. And, you know, Dr. Dyson says it all the time, we are highly regulated. And, you know, and understanding those regulations is our job, and the boosters may not have that opportunity because it's a volunteer organization. So if we can assist them and partner with them so that we don't run afoul of any of those regulations, that's our intent. That's our intent behind all of the pre-approvals that we require, is just to affirm that we are following all the regulations that we have to follow so that we don't, in turn, then have something happen that would then create a much larger problem.
Yeah. My last one, I promise, clarifying question. So do we either discourage or forbid our paid coaches from participating with booster-led fundraising?
That might go into 305. To look back.
I think that would probably be a conversation that I would imagine, right, as a coach, if the boosters are doing something,
They're going to coordinate.
they're gonna
I was
coordinate.
just, yeah.
Like I can see us, school unnamed, I can see us having a practice meeting before practice, and they allow the booster president to come in and say, hey, we're raising money for you. Would you sell these candy bars or whatever? Totally up to you. No basis, playing time or anything, whether you do it or not, but in order to help the boosters, would you do this? And then they leave. Versus the coach driving a fundraising thing. Like, I'll give you, the reason I bring this up is I had a person say, this is funny, this last fall I got my door knocked on twice by football players. One was selling a discount card with their school logo on it, and they said, we're doing this for the school, and then a week later, 2 football players knocked on my door selling me candy bars for the boosters. So I'm just...
So again, going back to that partnership and making sure that it's not overwhelming.
Yeah.
Collab, lack of collaboration.
Yeah.
And we're fighting against initiatives, right?
Yeah.
We're fighting against the school initiative.
Yeah, because
and the booster initiative.
if the candy bars got there first, then
Sure.
I already gave.
What your donation budget is, household
Yeah,
budget.
I already gave.
You should have been at Urbana when it first opened, sorry.
No, this is completely my jam because my title literally in the music department is fundraising manager.
There we go.
And I think the policies and regulations that we have in place really protect each group from competing against each other. And a good example is our music department we usually sell gourmet cupcakes in February. It's a big Valentine's Day thing, but because we traveled, we're like, we're gonna do it in the spring. So we wanna do it now. But the girls' tennis team just unveiled the same exact fundraiser, so we're like, so of course we didn't ask for permission before they did, so we were like, you know what, they're doing it right now, can you do it a different time? So we're not competing against them. But in terms of, and I do this with our athletics as well, now that I'm an athletic parent this year, but we do it in conjunction, in partnership with our staff members, like our music director and our coaches, but they know what we're doing, but we're doing it ourselves. We file all of our tax paperwork ourselves. We have our own bylaws. We have our own, our 501(c)(3), we do the Maryland Charitable Contributions. we do the taxes, we do all of that stuff. But I will say that FCPS a couple years ago, we got a letter, I think it was a pretty detailed 2 or 3 page letter. I was pretty new, and it actually shored up a lot of questions that people had had, and some of our boosters organizations, at least that I'm familiar with, some of our groups are very tight, and we know, like, we've got our bylaws, we review them all the time, you know, we're all in good compliance with the state and the federal taxes and all of that. Some of them were not. And so the guidance from FCPS that came in, some people kind of balked at it. I mean, I was there at the meeting, they're like, oh, well, you know, they're trying to. I'm like, well, what does it say? And it really just said, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z to stay in good compliance. So those things are really important because I have been part of organizations which fell out of compliance with the state of Maryland. And I will tell you, it took us more than 14 months to fix that. And it's a volunteer organization, so it's just as good as the volunteers that trained their predecessors, you know, the people that are coming in after them. Yeah. And it's a lot of stuff that you don't know as a, you know, I'm a new music mom or I'm a new football dad and I don't know what I'm, you know, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So I think that the information that can be shared is super helpful to make the boosters and the PTSAs a better partner with your school staff. I think that's really important. And I don't think that any of our groups, at least, you know, and my colleagues at other schools, we talk all the time about how we're doing things and how it can be better. And I feel like in general, the relationships between the different groups and their schools, their administration and their staff partners are really strong. And I think if you work within that framework, you get that support and you can be the supportive group. I think one thing I was thinking before this conversation even came up, as our budget constraints change. For example, I'm at Walkersville High School. It's a very old school. A lot of things are old. We're not even on the capital improvement list right now, so that's kind of a thing, right? So our theater curtains are ripping, and we've got a lot of things that are capital improvements that typically a booster association would not be able to fund or pay for. But I also, looking at what's going on in our, you know, education funding the past few years, the budget cycle that we go through, I feel like we need to think about, and again, this might actually kind of counteract the equality situation of some communities are much more able to raise huge funds to buy, you know, theater curtains and scoreboards and things, and other communities could not. So that's something to take into consideration. But as we go down this road of we're losing funding, we still have a bunch of students, we've got these facilities, can we talk, or where does that need to land in terms of, can I raise money to buy a new curtain for my building? You know,
that would fall under the regulation for
would that be more under
modification, and you can, you just have to comply with that need, and you know that regulation and the fundraising donation regulations that are currently under review, they speak to things like if you're going to donate for a capital improvement, it can't create an obligation on the system for future costs, right? So landscaping is probably the best example of that. It would be wonderful if a booster wanted to put in a koi pond, but then we have to maintain the koi pond, right? We have to.
Or elementary.
But there's a
Right.
there's a future cost associated with that.
Yes.
And so we have to be mindful of when capital improvement projects are presented, will there be a future cost? Now, is there a future cost for curtains at a theater? I don't know, steaming them for cleaning? I don't know.
That's fancy.
But when you spoke to the equity, I think it was brought up when we looked at that scoreboard for
Urbana High School.
Urbana, and just to speak to that, so one of the responses from staff, which I thought was good, is that when the boosters do those types of things, it actually does provide more of an equitable distribution because it frees up money that the system then has to apply to an area that doesn't raise
It
funds like
might give
that.
us the opportunity to do a scoreboard
Right,
at
so-
Tuscarora.
Right, exactly.
Because we didn't have to do the one in
somewhere else.
Urbana.
So those funds that
Yeah.
are there that are designated for those types of improvements then are freed up for that particular, you know, to be applied to another area.
Yep.
Which is an interesting way, because that, when my kids were in elementary, the big thing was PTAs doing playgrounds. And then it
Okay.
became this whole big equity issue. And then some schools would say, well, just because everybody can't do it, does that mean we have to wait? And so the attitude that, well, if it frees up funds to do, that's I think a more preferable overall attitude, but that's what then led to turf fields being paid for by us, is that equity piece. Opening Urbana High School, and I think this probably happens with new schools, not new buildings, but actually new schools, so Oakdale would have also, where the principal probably takes that initial lead with the booster groups, just because at Urbana, Hank Bolander, pulled in, I was gonna be PTA president, we had Rich Thompson as band boosters, and he pulled in Peggy Easterday, who is Tracy Jaramillo's mother, from Linganore High School, even though Tracy wouldn't be in school yet, because she had built the press box at Linganore High School. So experienced band booster, athletic booster, brought us and very much pulled the three groups together, and they used to call him captain, commandeered a lot of what we did, but there was a lot of, then we worked with coaches and all.
And our goal now is to have it be more centralized, right? Because I think there is an idea that, our principal, our leadership changes, but, in the central office, the people who are doing the operations and maintenance will be around, hopefully around for a long time to help with that. And so having a central view for those type of things, absolutely. I think in regards to what Ms. Allen was speaking about, yes, it does give us an opportunity when a boosters is able to. Our goal has been to be able to create within the operations and maintenance budgets replacement cycles, because we know that every time a fire curtain in an auditorium is replaced, eventually it's going to have to be replaced again. And the availability of funds is not there, and the operations and maintenance budget a lot of times is driven by an emergency. As we get ready to venture into April and the chillers are going to get turned on, we are waiting, and hopefully everything turns on without an issue, so that we can move some other projects forward. But that's the type of thing, so absolutely. I think the principal plays a huge role at the school, because he or she helps with the coordination to affirm that there's not 27 cupcake sales happening at the same time. And I think that's the goal, and that's with the kind of outside of this, like the booster manual, what best practices are. Kevin, who is the supervisor of athletics and extracurricular activity, he's involved with that, as well as Dr. Alavito and Afi, the director of high schools, to help ensure that there is a cohesive plan, because it really is that day-to-day interaction and that pre-approval, and having a principal understand what is happening, or he or she's designee, maybe an AP, or now as we move to the coordinators who are administrative positions, at least on the athletic side, to assist with that type of thing. We'll hopefully create these programs to have a better partnership, because ultimately that's our goal. But you're absolutely right. If you run afoul of the Comptroller of Maryland or the IRS, can't help you. And so that's why that's why we're like, here are the things that we'd like to see from you, because if we see the 990, and that at least lets us know that the IRS is not going to eventually remove your 501c3.
And we can periodically go on the IRS website and see if they're in good standings.
Yeah.
Okay, it depends on us as well to have to keep up on the number of boosters that are out there.
Right.
And Maryland does that as well. They have their in good standing through the business portal too.
Yeah.
I will say the boosters guidelines, when it was originally crafted back in the 2020 timeframe, it was really geared towards boosters, right? PTAs are governed by the Frederick County PTA and by a state. So they are governed by an oversighted body.
Right.
Right now it's not. Boosters are a parent and
All
community
independent,
organization.
separate.
They're really just volunteering their time. And so that oversight and what they don't know, just kind of being transitioned, that's where we were kind of gearing towards trying to provide them some good practices. If you look on the PTA website, they tell you what the internal controls are that they expect, what their bylaws are. They have a very robust oversight. And so the premise of of our committee was to really talk about the boosters and give them some guidance. That's premise. Another quick thing, I know you mentioned playground. Again, we want to make sure that we're not just buying off Amazon, that, that it's secure and safety, and, those things that our standards have are kept. One other quick comment, when we talk about donation and fundraising recognition are so kind of blended too, right? Because sometimes you fundraise for something and then you donate it. So there's a crossover there. And so again, from a financial reporting lens, I'm looking at, are you donating a capital item that I have to have in the financial statements? Is it a sensitive item that should be tracked on our inventory? Is it technology that has to make sure it meets all of our safeguard, our network, our protocols, our firewalls, all of that stuff? So again, trying to just bring awareness to those and kind of call out certain situations on the building mods, the technology, and then making sure that if it's capital over 5,000, we're tracking it as we should be, and tracking it.
Is there anything else you wanted to recommend be specifically put in the policy?
Well, I did have a comment about what we wanted to really kind of call out affiliated organizations. But really just in the statements, in the regulation I had originally drafted, I had some statements that Mr. Blivis said probably would be best suited for the policy. Okay. And they're just really vague again, but sets the tone at the top at your level. So just, support established school and school system priorities. It's not mentioned in the policy.
Yeah.
Fundraising be conducted in accordance with applicable federal laws, federal, state, and local laws. Be conducted be conducted in accordance with applicable board policies, FCPS regulations, and standard operating procedures. Be conducted in a manner that safeguards FCPS assets and ensures appropriate accountability. Promotes the general welfare, education, morale, civic mindedness of students. Not conflict with or disrupt educational programs. Not take place in an environment that endangers the health or safety of students.
I was just, that one was kind of, because when you talked about door to door, I'm like, wow, especially in elementary world, that was really frowned on in the later years. So yeah. I like the safety and well-being of the students. Yeah.
I like all those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, again, it says that there's more to the story.
Yeah.
The regulations talk about specifics, the SOPs talk about specifics, but just having some blanket statements that say what your expectations are.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, our goal is to get to yes.
Yeah.
But in order to get to yes, we need to follow these steps. And if you come to us, the earlier in the process, we can get you to yes quicker. And that's really everything that we do in regards to fundraising and donations. We want to help them get to yes. We just need to check the boxes so we can get there and then ensure that we've followed all the policies and procedures.
One other that we struck through the regulation was revenue generated by fundraising activities may not be used to reinstate programs, services, or personnel that was cut as a result of budget deliberations.
That's a good one.
So again,
So in other words, if you make the decision to eliminate a music program, the community can't fundraise to restore it.
Buy a teacher bag.
Yeah.
so those were just some general.
But we should be clear about that. I mean,
Well, I was going to say, but clear, could that be then a club after school? I mean, how far does that extend? I could see not putting it back in the school day, but could there be a club after school?
We're talking about items that are decisions made out of the budget, so a club, whether a club participates after school is not really going to be a budgeted
I
issue.
would say then that would
They'd have
open
to
the
apply
door.
for activity, pay activity fees, right, for the use of the building and
Yeah,
so forth.
yeah, all that, yeah,
Yeah.
would still apply.
So to add a sort of related, but maybe not wrinkle, something that I don't think anybody has talked about, but it kind of aligns with the boosters, is NIL. We have some very successful athletes, and name, image, likeness is a huge issue at the collegiate level, and it is starting to filter down to some of the high schools where name,
image, and
Now
likeness.
make money off of being a collegiate athlete.
Schoolers are now getting paid
They
to go
can
to some of the
learn
big
all of us.
a lot.
By a lot. They can get sponsored and paid by Nike to wear their stuff.
Millions of dollars.
Like say just an example, St. John's could pay a kid,
Monetize.
Like this.
Yeah, me neither.
like already, private schools already tuition free for the best athletes.
Now, this is at the high school level. I knew that at
Oh,
the
yeah.
college
yeah.
level.
It is starting.
Good counsel, if you're a good football player, you go to good counsel for free.
It is starting to filter down to
But now there's also money.
truly elite athletes, and frankly, we have elite athletes in this system. We have athletes who make up, participate at the professional level as they get older. We do have athletes who may get approached about name, image, likeness, and that can filter into the booster world because the boosters may, there could be a link between, well, you know what, there's a great athlete at Urbana High School and I want to get him to promote my stuff, so I'm going to, in addition to paying him, I'm going to give the booster a little bit to make sure he's got the best facilities to play at, right? I mean, it can all interconnect. And
It was bad enough with the Ravens and Under Armour and girls flag football and.
so, but I raise that not because it necessarily has to live in either of these policies, but it's something that we ought to be thinking about as something we may need to address in the future.
Do you think as a separate policy, or does it fall under some athletic,
I don't know. I don't know where it lives.
Are you foreseeing a situation where we would be maybe competing with another public? Because right now it happens. We compete with private schools already do this. I mean, back when, hell, this was 15 years ago, my son had a close friend that got free tuition to go play baseball in Baltimore, and they paid for their gas to get him there and everything else. But do you foresee where boosters would try to discourage a kid from leaving a public school to go to a private school by possibly giving them a couple $100 a month or?
Anything is possible.
I want to be in that booster group. We don't have that money.
We fought that, I mean, I can speak to this, we fought that when I coached. We had the best basketball player in the state of Maryland, and he got recruited constantly. I mean, private school coaches came to our games and would meet with him after every game.
Yeah, and I mean,
saying we could get you a bigger scholarship.
I could envision an awful lot. I can envision competition even between public schools, where a booster says, hey, someone who is really invested and has the resources and says, hey, I'll sign you to an NIL deal if your family relocates, and we'll make sure you have enough to pay for that relocation.
Someone in my neighborhood who's of FCPS family who's decided to rent a house.
Oh, listen.
Oh, yeah.
And that's been happening for years.
Oh, we've had that, yeah.
School shopping.
But the NIL is not far from that.
Montgomery County's been doing that for years.
Well, I have no part of it, I'm just saying.
No, definitely
I offered to drive the daughter to school and drop her off on my way to work.
What level is the NIL under federal guidelines?
It is
The wild.
I was just gonna
West.
say it's the Wild West.
The NCAA has tried to establish regulations, and they keep getting challenged in court, and the court keeps striking them down. So it is truly the wild, wild west right now.
What do they have to work for?
They're actually trying to get legislation through right now on trying to keep kids to contracts. Because they're moving so quickly, they play a year and
They entered the
on. They play at 4 different
tournament's
schools.
even over.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need to get involved in NIL, but I don't know.
Maybe not yet, maybe it's something we need to be thinking about. I mean, that day is gonna come if it's not already here.
It's nice to be proactive.
Well, especially
instead of
independent
reactive.
boosters, there's nothing that would stop a booster from saying,
Well, I think that,
Ethical.
if they live in the area, there's nothing from our perspective, as long as they're within the address, right, that there would be a concern. It could, an out-of-district placement, we have very specific guidelines in regards to that.
It's the idea of what a booster group pay for their move to get them into.
At the end of the day, is that
For that, though,
if Heather lives on the street that goes to that school, and then next month her family moves, and now she goes to school B.
Or they just rent an apartment or a townhouse. Yeah, there was a kid from
A
our
mailbox.
mailbox.
Well, I think your Your groups have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, the name, image, likeness issues, I don't know that we should be responsible for, but we should be aware, because you're talking about, these are kids who are negotiating contracts that are like like that's on their family. That's a parent to advise them about what their so I guess the question is, would we want to signal, are we entitled to ask for a notification of someone who's engaged, a student who has signed signed an NIL contract? Are they required to inform us, or can we encourage them to inform us? It's more about versus oversight or monitoring of it. That would just be my perspective.
I would say only if they're using Frederick County Public.
Well, they would be
School
because they're
name as part of their recognition, right?
These are all excellent questions, none of which I have answers to. So please don't look to me as the expert because I raised the subject, but it is a subject that has been on my mind as I watch the transfer portal at the collegiate level, and I hear more and more about players who play for Team A, go into the transfer portal, and they stay with Team A because Team A gave them a better deal. Those are the words that you hear now on ESPN. They got a better deal to stay, or they enhanced their package to stay. It's crazy, but it's happening.
Sure. I don't know that we have any examples of it though locally, and so I think that's my pause.
I
It's
don't
like,
know that we do.
right, and
Scholarshipping has always been around.
Right, but I also,
That's just-
the extent to where it would become the business of the school system would be if there's an allegation that, Nancy is getting more playing time because Nancy's got to, have a certain amount sort of per her, I think it's wise to be mindful of it and have it on our radar, but I don't actually know that we have any evidence of this being an acute issue in this moment.
Yeah, no, I think it's just something to be aware of.
And about proactively.
Yeah.
I would imagine in the next 5 years it'll be.
Yeah, that if
be
a
at this
if a
table.
booster program started actually compensating football and basketball players, I mean.
And arguably, all of our impacted students, to a large extent, would be minors. Maybe a few exceptions. So then there's that sort of other idea of parental rights to make these decisions for their children, and then so what's the interaction with the school system in that regard?
And that, I think, becomes the key thing. It's like what the students do or are able to do, a lot of that is on their parents. And as I say, we've all seen a kid that got in trouble. He stupidly wore his football jersey.
And we already have guidelines around that.
To steal beer from a liquor, and then his parents went shopped around in Montgomery County and Washington County to get him on another football team. Anyway.
We've had that with employees. We've had employees who've gotten arrested in their staff gear, and they have it in their mind, so I think there's some governing language we have in the code of conduct.
Yeah, so that part being separate.
Yeah.
What parents are gonna do in trying to provide the best for their children, that's on them, pro or con. It's how it interfaces with the school. And then, so for instance, if you just said the school mascot or colors or can't be, whatever.
I would argue that they are not authorized to use the school system's name, image, or likeness, right? So, which is different.
I think that's where you start jotting some notes for yourself, like how do we.
And that's where you were talking about strengthening the copyrights and that type of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And that could be something that you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but these kids now are reclassifying to get to college sooner in order to sign NIL deals. Cooper Flagg was 17 years old.
Do you really think that Bryce Harper, or a player of Bryce Harper's quality, who did not go to college, you think he's not that quality level player or a LeBron level player? And there are kids like that. You think they're not getting approached now in high school with NIL deals? Absolutely they are.
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
So this is,
Anyway,
the
off track there.
The fundraising discussion has
to think about.
been great. This has been very robust. I think we have a lot of work that we can do with the conversation we've had. This is slated to come back for action in June, at the June 25th meeting. So we have 3 months basically to put together a draft of what a new fundraising policy will look like.
Yep. What I would say is, because you guys have enormous experience in this, is that we empower you to share with Mr. Blevis language that should be in there.
They're gonna write it.
Okay.
Which has already
That too.
happened.
But also both prevent us, when you talked about, we have to think about all the things that are piled on our school administrators, is making sure we don't add more work to them. So while we place guardrails that are necessary, but that we're not adding any more work to our school administrators than they already have.
Yeah, I think that's important, give them the tools they need without placing more
Yeah.
responsibility.
Yes.
So,
Because
can I
it's
speak to
crazy.
the structure of the policy? So, we're gonna have a purpose, we have a policy statement, and I like a lot of what you have provided already in a statement format. So, but for definitions, I think we need definitions in there. And I'm gonna throw a bunch of them out here. I don't know if they'll all stay, but definition of what a booster club is, definition of the PTA, student organization.
PTA, PTO.
PTA, PTO, okay.
PTSA.
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 PTSA, gosh. We can put them all in one paragraph. What is fundraising? You probably should define that. What is curricular, co-curricular? What is the donation as opposed to the fundraising part of that? And, or maybe the fundraising donation relationship. Student activities, what is that? What's athletic, maybe the difference between student and athletic activities. Volunteer organization. And I think that your regulations and probably a lot of these books or these guidance documents already talk about this, but do we put in there any statement about FCPS role and responsibility in the fundraising? We make a statement about that, what our role is?
That's part of the regulation.
That's part of the regulation, okay.
We are trying to frame these regulations in a way that help understand what's expected of each group.
Okay.
So it's going to say, the school administrator is expected to do this. The parent group is expected, or the booster is expected to do this. Students, if they're involved, are expected to do this.
Right, and then you spoke about how they can collaborate, but what their different roles are, right? And I think that was it for me, so I don't know.
So in the regulation, you're spot on. So we've defined in the regulation now, so we defined it in policy as well. Charitable cause, co-curricular and extracurricular, crowdfunding, donation campaign, what is FCPS sponsored, what is the fiscal agent, what is fundraising activity, game of chance, parent and community groups is where we lumped in boosters, PTSAs,
Okay, great.
promotional material, and school-sponsored activities. So you certainly have given.
Okay,
And-
good.
But just to be aware, we don't typically define terms that aren't used. So
Yeah,
if
that's
it-
what I was gonna say, we want it to be.
Yes, I don't know where, and this is where we need help as writing it, where the policy ends and the regulation
Yeah,
begins.
when you kind of write the policy and then go back and define what's in the policy.
Yes, and so that's largely how we'll do it, is we'll lay out the statement and implementation, say, these are terms we know we need to define, and then as we're writing, we'll come across other terms. If we have definitions already, so we have them in the regulations, we'll bring them together so they're the same.
Yeah.
If it's in the policy and needs a definition, we'll create one, if it doesn't exist elsewhere. We don't then import that into the regulation, though, because the regulation may not use that term.
Yeah.
But then also, would it be beneficial to have a link to the booster manual, that kind of thing in this policy?
Yeah,
so that-
I think these older policies didn't tend to.
Right,
have
we
links,
didn't have
So
that.
I think that's.
But I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
absolutely.
listed there, but if
Yes, it
that
is.
actually, the booster manual?
Yeah, the last one. I'm sorry, it is not, I apologize.
No, that's the
Yes.
student activity
Yeah,
funds.
yeah,
Which
manual.
I think is great, but if
Yes.
that's a live electronic document.
It sounds like the booster manual came out after 2000.
Yeah,
This
but
was
I
last
think
revised
that
in
would be-
19.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, I was
Yeah.
reading
No,
that.
that's great.
And realized
Okay.
that's right.
So yes, we'll incorporate those kinds of cross-references.
All right.
So just to be clear though, manual, the SAF manual, county manual, you keep that as an internal document. It does talk about where the safes are supposed to be located, controls around, so we're not linked.
No,
they're-
no, I think
they're to
it's-
be internally linked, correct?
No, actually, if it's gonna go on the website, then it's public.
Yeah, so I,
We do have links to documents that are internal only, and they require login in order to access them.
Okay.
Because we link to forms, and some of our forms are internal.
Okay,
And if you don't have a login, you will not be able to access them.
okay.
And we would, and I agree with Melissa, I would be hesitant to make that a public document because there is sensitive information.
Yeah.
Come with, and some of the mic drops, those kind of things that we don't want to, provide that kind of
Right.
detail.
There's information that if someone were to PIA it, we would redact.
Gotcha.
Just get released.
All right,
Gotcha.
okay.
Perfect.
Well, that's good to know.
Just very quickly before we adjourn, there is no April meeting. We have, thankfully, I appreciate it, cleared the deck. The May meeting will have policy 443 and policy 444. The June meeting will have 2 action items, policy 426, fundraising in schools, policy 413, family and community partnerships, and 4 items for discussion only. We'll have policy 400, systemic delegation of duties, policy 425, flag display and salute, policy 427, religious expression, and taking a policy out of term because there was enough interest at the last board meeting. Policy 101, organization of the board, will come on for discussion to see what it is you all want us to do with it, just like we've been doing. I'll also have at the June meeting a roadmap for fiscal 26 and what all of the policy meetings for that year, what the tentative agenda for the entire year will look like.
Perfect.
Thank you.
and May is the 21st.
May is the 21st.
There, I have a question outside if you, I think we're about to adjourn.
Oh, thank you for the work
Yeah, I think you
you
were
have yet to
spot on
do.
time on that.
It-
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was
We need
very
it.
good. I just-
So 11:25 to adjourn?
Yep. So we're adjourned.